Morning, everybody. Welcome to the Softcat online event today. Thank you for joining. We're going to be speaking over the next 45 minutes, and we've got a panel of guests online today across Softcat's technical team, hopefully to help some of you who've got some of the main questions around remote working at the moment with everything that's going on. So we've tried to put together a bit of a list of Q&A, typical questions that organisations are finding themselves in. And as we go through the slides today, this is an open forum. There is a Q&A section at the end. But as we go through this, if you have any questions, please start posting them so we can hopefully pick them up as we go along. Hopefully it'll be a conversation between Softcat, and if you have any questions, by all means get involved and we can discuss them. As we go through, there'll be various people from Softcat who have expertise in certain areas. If you want to pick up with anybody at the end of this as well, just please make a note of the name, and we'll set up a separate conversation. The recording of this will be available at the end of the day on Softcat's website through our marketing team. So I'm going to hand over to James Seaman now, just to get us started and set the scene. James.
Thanks, Ebow. So thanks again, as Ebow said, for dialing in. I can only imagine with everything that's going on in a lot of your organisations now and some of the challenges, you're all pretty busy trying to come up with solutions and ways around the remote working challenges. What we wanted to try and do, and as Ebow said, we've had a lot of questions from existing customers around how to address some of these challenges, what their options are. We wanted to collate those frequently asked questions and feed the information back in a more of a collaborative forum like this, just to help you guys navigate the challenges that you've got, both tactically now, so that the burning platforms, but also potentially a longer term view as well. We want to approach it in the simplest way possible. So the team, Ebow and some of the other guys at Softcat have put together a business continuity, sort of a service continuity workflow, a set of questions, making sure the right questions are asked, and you guys are considering those questions, which I'm sure you are. And we focus those in 4 areas. So devices, so how do we get people working? How do they access a device, whether that be physical, virtual? Applications and data, so what people need to do, how that's then delivered to them, in what mechanism, whether that's virtual through VDI or through being streamed to devices, and then the wider collaboration elements. So how do we just communicate? How do we keep our organisation connected and working as effectively as they did in the office, or as close to that as possible? So the workflow and the process that the guys have put together, obviously, is focused in certain areas. It's a really useful set of questions, but there are gaps to that. And the point of this really is to fill those gaps and to pick those questions up around things like connectivity and identity and security and the other elements that fit within that workflow. So what I wanted to do today is, as collaboratively as possible, there is a Q&A section which we'll pick up at the end, as Ebow said. We wanted to work through those frequently asked questions. We've got some of the guys on the line who are the doers, the guys on the tools, the people that understand this and hopefully as close to your organisations and the problems that you've got as possible. Run through those questions and then pick up any direct questions you guys might want to raise that are more pertinent to you or your environment. And also, if there's something that you do want to ask us, feel free to pick that up offline as well. So just handing back over to you, Ebow, to sort of run through some of the things. Please feel free to post questions though as we go along. It's really important that we don't leave you guys with anything unanswered when we finish this.
Okay, thanks, James. Just checking. So we're all on slides on devices. So want to first pose this question to some of the team. So got John Gladson and a few others on here. So one of the frequently asked questions we're getting at the moment is, if there's no stock left in the channel, what are my options? So over to the team.
Yeah, so it's we have seen a lot of demand in recent weeks, which came at quite a fragile time anyway, owing to the Intel shortages, which haven't yet subsided. So stock is an issue in the channel at the moment, and certainly the more popular device specs have long lead times. So For example, there's no i5 8 gig, 256 gig laptops currently available. However, there are still options for traditional CapEx or OpEx purchases as long as customers are prepared to be flexible on the spec or form factor that they require. So potentially looking at an i7 16 gig model or perhaps a convertible laptop, there are still devices available. If, however, the requirement is urgent and it will definitely scale back after the event, then rentals would probably present a better option. So, John, would you like to just explain a little bit about that option?
Sure, thanks, Jamie. So although the rental market is obviously pretty much at its capacity at the moment, as Jamie said, there are short-term rental options. The most common rentals we've seen are i5 8 gig, 256 gig of hard drive, storage. We are asking customers to look at basically the specifications of the devices required for that short-term loan rather than model-based or vendor-based. But yeah, there are still options out there. We are seeing the lead time stretch slightly. We were about 72 hours for delivery, but we're now looking at about anything between 5 and 10 days, depending on quantity. So there are still options out there.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know if you want to answer the next one, John. What's the quickest, easiest way to configure equipment once it arrives, and what are the challenges?
Yeah, thanks, Ebow. So this hasn't really changed from our standard business or from standard business as usual options. We can use many different formats, from hard imaging through to SCCM distribution points, through to autopilot, which Julian can talk about as well. The idea is to try and get those devices business ready so they can be delivered to a business or a residential address.
Okay, thanks. And then what are we doing around data at the moment with this? What happens to data?
Yeah, sure. So as standard, we would always recommend doing full data destruction. So as our standard services are in place or industry standards, we would look to do on-site or off-site data erasure. So that's using standard NCSC or CHG certified software. Or if the customer requires it, we can continue to do shredding, or the customer can consume a shredding service to get rid of that data physically as well. But the customer should really be looking to make sure that all data is destroyed, and they get certification to prove that as well.
Okay, and is it just end user equipment that can be rented?
No, customers can go out and they should be able to get a full range of hardware, including infrastructure. So, from an end user perspective, we'll be able to get laptops, tablets, phones, desktops, monitors, anything from that end user selection. But then also into the full infrastructure piece. So depending on what's required for end user solutions, you should be able to get switches, routers, firewalls, load balancers, server storage, etc. So there was a lot more on the market, but I'm sure there will still be some equipment left.
And how long could it be rented for?
So generally rentals are anything from 24 hours up to a year. It really comes down to the financial balance. Obviously, I would normally say anything else over 12 months, then you're into the leasing territory. But certainly, standard rentals can be from 24 hours onwards. We're basically quoting the standard 3 months at the moment, but customers can what we call roll those, or they can ask for longer. So they can basically ask for whatever length of whatever period of time they require.
And what happens if they need to extend that period?
Thank you very much, Ebow. So if they need to roll, they can either roll on month by month and just pay a certain charge for that rolling fee, or if the customer feels that they would need to extend that for another 3 months, then they can negotiate another 3-month term on that. So the great thing with rentals in situations like this is pure flexibility.
Okay, and can you purchase the rental equipment if you needed to?
Yeah, in some time, in some extreme measures or requirements, then yes, absolutely, you can do. Sometimes if the rental rolls on for such a period of time, then it does make more commercial sense to actually acquire the equipment rather than continuing to rent it. So that is something you should definitely have a discussion with whoever you're renting the equipment off. As we spoke earlier, as Jamie mentioned, Softcat or the channel, for example, will always work to sell new equipment and deliver new equipment. So we wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but if you need to, then absolutely.
And can a customer actually rent software?
So software is a bit more of a tricky one. So if the software comes pre-installed with the hardware, such as appliances or with end-user devices, then yes, in theory, you are renting that software. But if you need to rent hardware that needs an operating system separately, or some sort of software or licensing to run on that hardware, then you really need to speak to your software provider, reseller.
Okay, thank you. Adam, Louca, I know you're on here too, one of our Chief Technologists. Can I ask, so what device security should you consider for this?
So I guess you've got to consider two things really as part of this. One, what is the baseline security policy you're going to take? So what is your minimum security standard? I would typically expect organizations that are transferring any company confidential data to ensure that as a minimum your data is being encrypted on those devices. We're going to see a lot more data distribution as we go through this unusual time, and ensuring that device passcodes are enforced, that forwardless encryption is turned on, I would expect to be a minimum on those devices. The second thought then is where should you then go above and beyond? So where are you then looking to ensure that data isn't leaving devices? So looking at your data leakage policies, specifically around things like potentially USB port blocking and or encryption. One of the key challenges we have seen is that exceptional times means we're going to have to allow for exceptional security measures. I think as a security professional, we have to respond to risk as part of this. And there are going to be some tough decisions internally about relaxing of security controls where appropriate to get the business working. So that may be allowing things like transferring and printing of data to local home printers, potentially copying data onto USB sticks that might not be allowed. But those are the two things I would consider initially.
Okay, thanks, Adam. So yeah, we're starting to get some questions in. Thank you. I think so. One of the questions that's come in, I'll answer right now, although we'll pick it up again a little bit later. But just so you feel like we've covered that one. So the question that came in is, how safe is Teamviewer? So I'm just going to put this out to the entire group, and if someone wants to speak up.
Okay.
So how safe is Teamviewer?
So it really depends. As often it's how do you use these systems? Teamviewer has had a number of issues over the years with vulnerable software and insecurity in the protocols that it uses. But at the moment, there isn't any known problems with Teamviewer. One of the things that you will have to consider is the access and authentication requirements for Teamviewer, and whether or not you're using the paid version or the enterprise version. I know at least in the paid version, you're still relying on a rotating code, and that could obviously potentially be spoofed. The other element to consider is just around if you're going to start allowing things like Teamviewer, they can actually be used as malicious ways of viewing access into internal systems. So quite a lot of organizations have actually blocked Teamviewer as part of their security model. So if you're going to be relaxing those controls, potentially you're not going to be able to detect that type of traffic in the future. But as my sort of the thing I keep coming back to is, it really depends on how exceptional your circumstances. If you need to get things working fundamentally, operating your business potentially may take precedent over using third-party tools that typically don't have as much penetration in the enterprise.
Okay, thanks, Adam.
It's about appropriate use. My favourite word, Adam. You like it when I reference that all the time, but it's about the appropriate use of the tool at the appropriate time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Teamviewer is going to save someone's heart surgery. Let's do it. Teamviewer. If we don't need to, let's not do it.
Okay, thank you. So just moving on to applications now. So as we go through this, the flow when we put this together was to try and think of the minimum components that we would need to be able to get people up and running. So we've covered devices, and hopefully we've covered enough points to fill in the gaps that the PowerPoint originally didn't. So the next area, which I'll be leaning on Julian and Adam Louca again, is about applications. So to start off with, to mitigate the risk of data loss when staff use their personal devices, can I provide a read-only experience to my users within SharePoint and Exchange Online, but not impact their productivity?
But just before we answer that one, I think the slides are jumping a little bit here.
Yeah,
it looks like we're jumping forward.
It's gone to
awesome. Thank you. No worries. Thanks, Ebs.
So yeah, Julian, to mitigate risk of data loss when staff use personal devices.
Yeah, so if you're consuming SharePoint and Exchange Online already, and arguably Teams, and using those platforms supposed to expose these tool sets through the browser, you can actually implement policy to restrict how your users can access that when they're accessing it from a personal device. So whether that's SharePoint or Exchange or Teams, you are limiting the ability to download or print or potentially copy and paste information outside of that session. So on a personal device, you can present a full-fledged SharePoint experience working with Word and Excel and PowerPoint, download attachments and save them to OneDrive and sort of stay within the ecosystem, but still keep the tools you're used to, but at the same time prevent that information from being copied to that local non-managed device. So it's certainly an option to mitigate data loss within those tool sets at least. I think that covers that.
Yeah. The other thing to just consider on that piece is just, again, looking at the use cases. How are your users interacting with those applications? Is that sort of online application going to give them what they need? But it's definitely going to present a strong security model. But we may find that we need to relax some of that if users can't access the functions that they need. Ebow, I think you're muted.
Thank you. So if my organization uses Office 365 Pro Plus, are my users able to install a copy on their devices?
Yeah, so a simple one, but sometimes obvious. Might have to mute someone. It's an obvious one, but Pro Plus is a very useful piece of software and can be used on personal devices. It's just me hearing the echo. Sorry, guys.
Ebow, are you unmuted?
I just have to take that because I know it's a little bit echoey. So, in terms of Office 365 Pro Plus, you've basically got 5 local installs on a device like a laptop or a PC or whatever, but you've also then got 5 installs on a mobile device and 5 on a tablet as well. So 15 in total, but 5 primary PC and laptop devices. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, go for it, Adam.
Ooh. That's all right. I was going to say there's a question in the Q&A that just popped up. So saying we're heavy users of remote desktop services, which in theory should be perfect from working from home. So, yep, I agree with that. However, they've never exposed the services outside the company wide area network. What best practice would we suggest for exposing RDP for the only internet for staff wishing to connect from home? I guess I'll start with the start maybe to the security answer. So, yeah, really, there's 2 things you need to consider here. One is the authentication element. So how strong is the authentication you're using against that system? So is it just single factor? Is it multi-factor? Are you going to hide it behind some sort of connection mediation device, something like a VPN or an ADC? And how are you going to protect that authentication? That for me is the key first point. RDS is very commonly exploited by ransomware strains. So there are a number of different strains that will constantly be scanning for exposed RDS servers and using things like password lists to attempt to gain access, also taking advantage of known vulnerabilities in those platforms. So do make sure you are managing connectivity to those devices. The second thing you need to consider as part of the RDS piece is also DDoS. So one of the things that we have a concern about is as we start to expose services, actually the likelihood of denial of service attacks become more important for an organization if everyone's now connecting through that single remote entry point. So just considering monitoring those systems for signs that they may be being attacked by a DDoS attack. So starting to just monitor that experience, making sure that the capacity is working. Should you start to have issues with that, you may want to consider putting a cloud scrubber in front of it, or hiding it behind something like Cloudflare or an alternative a cloud application delivery point. So there's a couple of bits there. Has anyone else got anything to add on the RDPs?
No, if not. So maybe back to you again. We probably covered a little bit about this, but I know you wanted to talk about how you secure your applications, talk about authentication and DDoS, etc. Can you elaborate on that for me, please?
Yeah, it's fine. So we kind of covered the first bits there. So when you're thinking about any remote access solution, you've got to think about getting the identity and authentication piece right for those who have a cloud-based identity platform, thinking about integrating SAML and OAuth-based and modern authentication protocols, so you can take advantage of conditional access, MFA, identity primitives that are included in those types of solutions. Where you don't, then you need to be considering a network-based approach. So that's things like VPNs, where you're able to apply that MFA control. There is the first piece. So just really ensuring that whoever is accessing those systems is who they should be, and that they're all correctly authenticated. We briefly touched on the DDoS piece. So that's all about ensuring that actually you have a plan should you start to see an increase in DDoS attacks. I see that being relatively low likelihood, but it could be very disruptive for organizations who've shifted all of their working practices to these centralized points, remote access gateways. And then the final piece you've got to think about is vulnerability management. So we've seen over the last even few months a number of critical vulnerabilities being leveraged against things like VPN. So we had the Pulse Secure vulnerability that came out. We also had the Citrix NetScaler, so ramping up your vulnerability management programs on those external services for those who aren't doing any vulnerability management at the moment or aren't doing any scanning, just getting yourself a cheap copy of Nessus Professional, or alternatively using something like OpenVAS, which is an open source vulnerability scanner, and just scanning those external ranges and just making sure that you're not running any critical vulnerabilities on any systems that you're now exposing that previously have been behind the firewall. So we're starting to see this breakup of the kind of crusty security model, and we need to react to ensure that we're not leaving nice, easy vulnerabilities exposed on the edge. So they're my 3 bits.
Thank you for that, Adam. So we've covered the first 2 sections. I want to move on to the next part of the components, which is...
But we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A. Do you want to grab those?
Excellent. Absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I know you're trying not to miss them out.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think the next question is, SharePoint lockdown question. The suggestion only works for Office apps.
I'll pick this up. So I think this is about limiting sort of a read-only experience within SharePoint when you're accessing it through the browser, if I'm not mistaken. To clarify, this is only through browser. So when you're accessing any of those services through the browser, SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, etc., you have that experience applied there. As a result, it is then recommended to look at blocking rich client access if what you're referring to wouldn't apply to rich clients. It only applies to the browser. But in case you are referring to the Office applications, as in the Office 365 suite as a whole, as I've mentioned, this policy would apply to across that stack, so Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, and really anywhere your data resides.
Just to add on to that, if you're thinking about adding read-only mode for other cloud-based apps, you're probably looking at a group of technologies called CASBs, so Cloud Access Security Brokers, that are a sort of a modified web filter that inspects traffic specifically going to web applications and allows you to restrict and control your ability to interact with those web apps based upon device condition, based upon location of device, whether it's a BYD or a corporate device. So there is technology out there to achieve that functionality, but it's not something you're going to natively have within your Office 365 environments.
Thank you.
Just to add, Cloud App Security does provide that feature. So with the full-fledged Cloud App Security, you can actually wrap this in front of all your SaaS solutions outside of 365 as well, in case you're using that stack already.
Oh, and we have another question actually just popped in, so I'll ask this one at the same time. So we have a number of customers looking to access local shared map drives from home. Some of these customers have slow internet connections into the office. We require a solution to synchronize the folders outside of the organization to serve remote workers, but also be available locally on premises, i.e. not work in the cloud whilst at the office. Could you suggest a solution? I don't know who wants to pick that up, but if you can give a quick overview, and if that goes too detailed, we can pick that one offline afterwards as well, because we save the questions.
Yeah, I can take that one, Ebow, if you want. So there's a couple of options that stand out. You've got Ivanti File Director, which can sit in front of any SMB share, and then you have a client application, and it can do either online or offline mode. So it can download files as and when needed, or it can sync a file share to the endpoint, and then they have a local copy. So it still leaves your existing on-premises infrastructure in place, but it gives you the ability to sync to client devices or third-party servers if need be. There's also a Citrix share file that does a very similar thing. Citrix has a cloud management plane, so you can stand it up pretty quickly, and they all just have effectively sit on top of an SMB share and then have a client application.
Okay, thank you, Nat. I've seen some more questions come in, but what we're going to do is we're just going to move on to the next question because they are applicable to your area, Nat, around application delivery methods. So we'll start to do that, and then we'll go back and ask those questions as well, just to make sure we're covering everything. So application delivery methods, Nathaniel, possibly Graham as well from the connectivity side, and Adam Louca. So first of all, when and why should I think about expanding my existing RDS or VDI solution? I know customers will have them potentially, but at what point do we need to do it? And how do we do it?
Yeah, so the key is with all the different solutions is to simplify it as much as possible. So look at your users, split them into user groups, and then determine what applications they need. The key is to find the minimum amount of applications for a user that allows them to do the majority of their job. So don't worry about those odd applications that you may use once a year at the end of a financial year, things like that immediately. Worry about those in the long term. Once you've mapped out the applications, then start to think about the relationship between the application and the data that application accesses. There's two approaches, broadly speaking, and you can either take the data to the users or you can bring the users to the data. And it depends on that relationship between the applications and the data. If the application is latency sensitive, so it has a database backend, or it has something which doesn't work over a solution such as a VPN, things of that nature, then you usually have to take the users to the data. And that is where an RDS, Citrix, Horizon, Nutanix frame, for example, will come in to help you reduce that latency reliance, because the application is running either in your data center or in a cloud provider next to your data, effectively. So you're not reliant on that data. Ways in which you would bring the data to the users if the applications weren't latency sensitive. Things like SharePoint Online, OneDrive, G Suite, which we've already talked about. But if you do need to bring the users to the data, that's where the RDS side of things come in. Obviously, as well, if security is a major concern, or if you're going across, say, international boundaries and you need to keep data in a particular country for any reason, then RDS, Citrix, VMware, etc., can be very useful to keep that data there, but still give access to the users. So that is where you would look to use RDS or VDI. The process for expanding it is take that same application methodology we just talked about, use that to build a resource profile, so how much CPU and memory do the people need. That will give you a very quick answer if you have the capability on premises to expand that far. If you do, then you just need to answer, do you have the licensing and do you have the bandwidth? Licensing is a bit of a variance thing. RDS, for example, is a soft licensing model after 2016, so you can go over your licensing and then true up later on. Horizon and Citrix, they're both hard licenses, so they won't let you expand unless you purchase new licenses. If that's the case, you can always approach the vendor, try and get some trial licenses, expansion licenses during these extreme times. If that's not a possibility, there are options such as Hive.io or Frame, which are offering free trial licenses, and that might not be part of your existing Citrix estate, but it may be a little thing that you can spin up just to get you over this particular time.
Thanks.
Bandwidth-wise, I've got an echo again. Bandwidth-wise, rough guideline is 1.5 meg for a light user, 3 meg for a medium user, and then if you're talking CAD, you can get all the way up to 15 meg. So bandwidth is a key consideration, and I think Graham's going to touch on that. If you don't have the on-premises capacity, you can use cloud providers. You've got things like Windows Virtual Desktop on Azure, and I'll touch on that in a minute. You can just spin up RDS servers in AWS or Azure on infrastructure as a service. Just put an RDS farm in there and access it that way. Both Citrix and Horizon have their cloud offerings, which you can pair up with an on-premises offering to expand out into the cloud and give you that additional capacity that you need. But the key with all the cloud things is where are your applications and data, and it always comes back to that. If that data is on premises, a desktop-based cloud isn't necessarily going to perform that well or perform any better than a client on the end of a VPN. So the key thing with all the RDS, Citrix, Horizon discussions is think about the applications and the data at all stages.
You started to semi-answer this, but just want to flip this question a little bit. How quickly can you spin up a cloud RDS or cloud VDI? How long will it take to get it functioning?
So the key thing is what cloud infrastructure do you have at the moment? So if you have either AWS or Azure provision at the moment, with all the cloud desktop offerings, the consistent thing is you need a domain controller to authenticate against, because you've got domain joined PCs that are running effectively in the cloud. So at bare minimum, you need, if you're starting from greenfield, you need a VPN into whatever cloud provider and a domain controller sat in that cloud provider. And then after that, once you've done those things, you can spin up an instance pretty quickly, and you can scale it out pretty quickly. It's the very nature of cloud computing that you can scale quickly. But once again, the question comes back to the applications. If you have to move applications and servers and things into cloud as well, that's when it can take quite a considerable amount of time. So, we're having a lot of conversations with customers about accelerating their cloud adoption plans, and that is as much of a consideration as actually spinning up the desktops.
Okay, thanks, Nat. And we're out of time, so I might come back to this a little bit in a second, but I want to go to Graham a second. For all the stuff that Nathaniel's talking about, it relies on good, reliable connectivity. So can the ISPs actually handle the extra demand that's been asked of them for working from home?
Thanks, Ebow. So I guess this is an area where, as an IT department, you probably have the least amount of control. What it's coming down to is your end users having their broadband contracts in place already, and I suppose ISPs who do play in the consumer broadband space, and that's probably where the realm of the unknown is. I think what we are going to see is these ISPs wanting to step up to the plate and showing that they can absolutely smash this. So the key message from ISPs in the marketplace right now is that they absolutely do have capacity to meet the demands, particularly at peak times, and even when potentially schools go home and things like gaming start to increase across their networks. They are stating that they are ready. I think from an OpenReach perspective, what they did was that they cited the Amazon Prime live streaming of Liverpool versus Everton over December, and how they had the capacity to facilitate a real peak in their network. Vodafone cited the exact same example, stating that they were ready, while BT and TalkTalk are both saying from a business perspective, running from home, they have the capacity as well. I think what I've seen personally from the ISPs in the past is that what they typically do is contend business and consumer somewhat. The general idea has always been that business is 9 to 5, and while business is there, the business across their network is happening from an office, and so they've got capacity. People go home and start streaming Netflix, and the capacity is there because the business drops. So what they are saying is, from a core network perspective, they do have the capacity. because there won't be the same amount of business traffic across their core from those offices, but the consumers will then be driving that from their homes and using up that capacity. The probably unknown at this stage is the last mile contention, and that comes down to the amount of people logging on. Local contention rates, which are sometimes 40 or 50 to 1 on some contracts, being the issue, where we may need to ask users to turn off video and just use voice as an example.
Okay, thanks, Graham. There's so many questions coming through. I think what we'll do is I want to make sure we answer a couple of the customers' questions. Any of the ones that we don't go through, we're creating an FAQ document, so we'll make sure that we do cover everything in one way or another. So just going to a question that was asked a few minutes ago. Does Softcat offer a VDI that can VPN into an office? Sounds like a Nathaniel potentially question, but I'll let you go for it.
So we don't offer the desktop managed services at the moment. However, we can assist you with spinning up, say, for example, a WVD instance, which can then have either a site-to-site VPN back into your office or a client to VPN back into your office. So we can definitely help you with that, setting up the a VDI with a VPN back into your office.
Okay, and then
tactically, as a solution, we can help with that, but also because that is a very different operating model for organisations to support an infrastructure like that you haven't had before as well, longer term, we can help you understand how to support that, even if it's something that you're going to scrap in a few months when all this dies down, hopefully, fingers crossed that it does die down in a few months, or something that you're going to persist with. We can work with you on the tactical solution, but then we can also help add that maturity into your organisation, whether that be process, governance, training, whatever that might be, so that it becomes part of your prevailing infrastructure and service, and the capabilities there to look after it.
Okay. Thanks, James. So, yeah, we've got a few minutes left. We've got another section to go through. So I'm going to ask this last customer question quickly. Whoever answers it, you've probably got 30 seconds to give a good summary, and then we'll move on to the last bit. So would you suggest moving from SharePoint on-prem to online using the migration tool? This is purely to allow access through the web browser. Is that you? Is that Julian? Is that you? 30 seconds. Can you answer that?
Yes. So, I mean, I would always advise moving to SharePoint Online anyway, but depending on what your needs on why you have on-premise. But you can also expose your SharePoint on-premise through, for example, ADFS or using something along those lines. So there's no need to migrate to become externally exposed. But yes, certainly you would, but I don't know how quickly that would take you. It depends how much you have. But you can still like that SharePoint Online and still use that space and connect them at later end, but there's definitely a discussion to have there before making that decision.
Okay, thank you. Right, on to the last section. Like I said, the slides are available for everybody anyway to go for some more detail. But so the last section's on voice video, which we could really call collaboration. And that's going to be, we're going to lean on Stephen Burnley and Michaela to help us answer some of these questions. So first question, how do we make our telephony available for home workers?
You've basically got three options for making corporate telephony available to home workers. At its simplest, you could go down a pure mobile phone only strategy. You need to be careful about that one, especially if you're going to be using personal devices, because some of the information you transmit across your corporate telephony platform is covered by regulation. So you're going to need to take some very careful legal advice before really taking that approach. The other two options depend very much on where your starting point is. If you're already on cloud telephony of some sort, then almost every cloud telephony platform has some sort of work from home, smart app for your mobile, app on your desktop type application available for you. The question mark for you is going to be, are you licensed to use that? So you may have taken the most basic form of license in that cloud platform, which is usually a desk phone only. What we're seeing is most service providers are allowing you to burst into or burst your licensing to enable that during this period. So for a 90 or 180-day period, you're going to need to talk to your cloud provider about that. If you've got an on-premise platform and that still covers a good 80-85% of all of you, then if that was purchased in the last 5 to 7 years, it almost certainly has the capability to provide work from home telephony. What you don't have probably is the implementation of that feature. Now, that is slightly more complex. If you were to look at, for instance, Cisco Call Manager, then you're going to be looking at as maybe 2 to 3 days of configuration work to get it up and running. And you're going to have dependencies on your firewall and things like that, because we're talking about real-time comms traversal. So you need to be exposing ports in your firewall, setting up stuff in your DMZ and things like that. Usually the licensing is cheap to free, but the amount of work you need to do is fairly involved. So I think that pretty much covers that one.
And how do we get a web conferencing platform set up for our users?
So web conferencing is actually pretty easy to do at the moment, because there's been lots of press that you'll have all seen from people like Microsoft, WebEx, RingCentral, Fuse, Zoom. Everyone's offering a free web conferencing platform of some sort for the next 90 to 180 days. Not all of these are the same. There are differences in feature set between all of them, so you need to evaluate which one is most suitable for you. And that's not always the same as the vendor that's providing you with your telephony. So don't just say, right, I've got Cisco, so I should take Cisco WebEx. Or don't just say, well, I've got Fuse or 8x8 in the cloud, so I should just go with those platforms. Take a look at what the differences in feature set are and how they align to you. You're also going to be looking at, I imagine, Teams, because most people have got 365 subscriptions for these. And I'll hand over to Michaela to talk about the differences in what you might have in E1, E3, E5, etc.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. So, yeah, a number of customers are asking around, I know I've got Teams as part of my 365 subscription, but I guess what am I entitled to as part of that? So ultimately, if you've got a subscription that includes Teams, which is 90% of them, you will have the ability to be able to do instant messaging and desktop sharing. You've also got access to Teams and channels and being able to provide, I guess, digital teamwork space. And that can be actually really powerful when you're enforcing remote working. From a meetings perspective, unless you have E5, what you will have the ability to do is access or host and access a Teams meeting via the client or via a web browser for those that don't have Teams. I guess as an additional feature, so an add-on, you've then also got the ability to bolt on an audio conferencing dial-in number as well, but that isn't typically available unless you've got E5. Now, if you want to do anything like PSTN dialing, so being able to spin up Cloud PBX within Microsoft, that once again is a E5 feature only, or an add-on to your existing E3, E1 subscriptions. Once again, you would then need to bolt on a calling plan on top of that. So there's a fair amount of variances there. And what I'd say is any specific questions around that, speak to your licensing provider, because they'll be able to support you in terms of what you've got at the moment, what you're entitled to, and what that step up could cost you as an organisation as well. But that's quite easy and quick for you to be able to administer to your users.
Thanks, Michaela. We've literally got only about a minute left. I'm going to put somebody on the spot, because I know we were umming and ahhing about how easily we could answer this question, but I'll put it over to you experts. Tough one. So how do I ensure critical processes such as finance payments are protected when face-to-face contact isn't possible? And you've probably got about a minute to take a very tough question and make it into something understandable. So go for it.
Thanks, everyone. Really appreciate that. So what you need to do with this is you've got to be looking at how your critical processes are built up at the moment. So if you imagine, say, a purchase order request comes through, it sits on someone's desk in email, they may have a face-to-face chat with someone, they may talk to the person next to them. Now, when you're working from home, that becomes more difficult to enforce. So there is no really easy answer to this other than you need to be sending out reminders to people that processes still need to be enforced even while you're working from home, working away from the office. So if there needs to be a certain sign-off for a certain level and you don't have an application that enforces that by default, you need to be reminding people constantly. And it's going to sound and feel a bit like a drag. People are going to get a little bit annoyed at you. But especially in the first few days and first few weeks of this, it needs to be reminded and constantly hammered home to people. It will ultimately become second nature. But to start with, especially because a lot of people we're talking about here have never worked from home, or if they've done it, it's been extremely rare. You need to be constantly reminding them that the processes you follow in the office have to be followed through just working from home as well. Over time, if this goes on for 12, 18 months, yeah, you're going to actually need to actually develop some platforms, some systems, whether that's in SharePoint, some of the other Microsoft stuff, which actually enforce these procedures. So actually, you know, you automate processes so that when a purchase order goes through, for instance, it flows through to the next person. It cannot be signed off until it goes through to the next person, et cetera, et cetera. But in the short term, if you're doing things manually, you've just got to reinforce and hammer home the message every single day.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. So we've got through as many questions as we could. We are collecting all of these, and we will get back to you if there's anything that we have missed out. We do apologise. This session has been recorded and will be available on Softcat's website for our marketing team later on today if you joined a little bit later. And as I said earlier, we'll be creating a document of all these frequently asked questions with all the answers fully answered for you in case there's anything you want to go back and review later on. So yeah, thank you everybody for taking the time to join us at Softcat today for this live web event. Hopefully you found it useful, and yeah, please get in contact if you've got any further questions. Thank you.